I grew up in Colombia and was raised in a Mennonite household and community. Amidst the long-term armed confrontation in the country, during the 1980s, the Mennonite Church worked at renewing its identity and peace vocation. This demanded custom discernment to envision and to become communities of peace built on Jesus' ways of peace. In this process of discernment, stories from the 16th century Anabaptist movement became points of reference. The earliest Anabaptists in Switzerland were first followers of the reformer Ulrich Zwingli, but they wanted to take further steps, including the separation of the church and state on adult or believers' baptism. Some of them also believed that obedience to Jesus' teachings means not returning violence with violence, even if this meant suffering torture and death. With a similar determination, many today continue to discern what it means to witness to Jesus' peace in different contexts in our world. In this video, we will see some of the ways in which people and communities have understood and embodied this call for peace. Mennonites in Ukraine bear witness to their faith even as they are directly affected by war. It is deeply moving to see how they live and strive for peace.
Enemy comes, they occupation my home, they kill my sister. There were many people who died, my friends, my uncle died in this war. When I go and preach in front line, I have a good time with soldiers. My words don't have any sense, but soldiers says, wow, you said something very good. God's provided, it's his plan, he give me powerful, he give me wisdom, and sometimes I don't have any words when I see soldiers without legs. Right now, I preach and pray only about God peace in my country, my family, and my life.
Alexei chooses not to return violence for violence, in spite of losing a sister and other family members and friends. He finds strength as he prays and preaches about God's peace. So, what does peace mean to Mennonites in this setting?
Peacemaking during the war is being patient. We don't have answers, we don't have right answers, and sometimes it's good just to listen.
Peacemaking is more about people who are suffering, how to help them to continue to love God, to love one another while being in pain.
А й видача гуманітарної допомоги для людей, які цього потребують.
The peacekeeper is able to bid, listen, and pray. Then you can talk a little about forgiveness, because forgiveness is a true way to healing the heart.
Peace and justice are more than just the absence of war. It means hope, freedom, and safety.
Я очень благодарен всем нашим друзьям с разных стран, которые в это сложное время поддерживают Украину.
It is challenging and inspiring to see how even in contexts of deep violence, there are individuals and communities who continue to find ways to witness to their faith and to peace. Searching for peace does not end with the silencing of the weapons or end of a war. It is an ongoing process which includes healing deep wounds and broken relationships. Rooted in centuries-old conflict between predominantly Catholic Ireland and mainly Protestant England, tensions erupted into violence in Northern Ireland in the late 1960s. Mary, a Mennonite psychologist, left her practice in Honduras for a one-year assignment in Northern Ireland. Her vision? To learn and to be mentored by experienced peacemakers like Gordon McDade.
I'm from Honduras, and I was working with human rights, specifically with every type of population that was in movement. I wanted to help others like Jesus did. Whatever I was doing, they can see Jesus through me.
So here we are, standing beside one of the longest peace walls in Belfast. And whenever the conflict kicked off in 1969, this was one of the areas where the violence that we saw then was particularly acute. I was a pastor on the Shankill Road at that time, involved in a bomb blast myself. That was the closest I'd ever come as someone who lives in Northern Ireland to losing my own life. The bomb blew out across the front of the car that I was driving. I spent the next couple of hours pulling people out of the rubble of that horror. And so what I talk about now is that we have an absence of violence, but I don't think we have peace.
With all your experience with violence, how would you define it over here?
The violence has changed now. It's become a violence of language, attitude. Even scripture gets weaponized to justify sectarian attitudes. And so our hope and prayer and what we're working towards as peace builders is that there will come a day whenever not only these physical walls come down, but the walls within people will also come down.
I was looking for a new beginning, but I was not expecting it to be in so many ways. I have changed in every way of my life.
As a result of her year in Northern Ireland, Mary is serving a 2-year assignment in rural areas in Latin America. Several of the first-generation Anabaptist leaders were theologically learned or even academically trained. Their study and sharing of what they learned shaped the identity of the early Anabaptist movement. Seeking to be a peacemaker is a process of constant learning. To be willing to share one's path with others and to be open to learn from others. Mulanda's exposure to traumatic experiences led to a journey as a refugee. As with many of his Anabaptist predecessors, he came to see the futility of violence. Today, he is recognized as a mediator committed to justice and peace building.
I'm a peace coach, organizing workshops, bringing together people from different backgrounds to teach them about how to resolve conflict non-violently. These people go back to their countries, Congo, Burundi, Rwanda, and they start peace-building initiatives. And this has become a force for peace against violence. Nous, les chrétiens, on ne donne pas la chance aux autres pour qu'ils nous parlent de leurs histoires. On ne les écoute pas. On fait semblant d'écouter, mais en fait, on n'écoute pas. Et s'il y a des soucis, il faut faire face à ça. D'abord, il faut faire partir ces barrières-là. C'est regarder soi-même de l'intérieur, voir si on a la volonté d'aider.
Peace education and formation are crucial in building cultures of just peace. Violence and injustice are embedded in structures, institutions, and cultures. Making space for training and formation is key to nurturing the imagination and creativity needed for peace. Peace is not limited to human relationships. Seeking peace needs to include how we relate with land and water. Colonization represents deep damage in human relationships and with nature.
We were brought here as part of a colonial project to dispossess land, to make it usable, to turn it towards profit for the nation.
Over centuries, Canada's settler colonization pushed First Nations people from their land with land treaties, many of which were broken. Between 1880 to 1997, more than 150,000 indigenous children were torn from their families and forced into residential schools. Adrian, a leader from the indigenous Six Nations in Ontario, and Laura from Sterling Avenue Mennonite Church work at restoring relationships between local First Nations and settler communities. The Spiritual Covenant was an agreement initiated by the Six Nations and developed in collaboration with Sterling.
So Adrian, where did the idea for a spiritual covenant come from?
Well, I'd heard a story of Mennonite farmer came to Six Nations, and the Six Nations person said, "How is the harvest this year?" And the person said it wasn't very good. And then the question came from Six Nations, "Do you have a seed for next year?" And the person said, "No, this is all that we have, and we're bringing it here to pay our lease payment." And the Six Nations person said, "Take that back and come back when there's a better year for you." And so I think that that's part of what this spiritual covenant is all about. So I began that conversation with your church about this spiritual covenant 17 years ago.
So what does spiritual covenant mean from a Six Nations perspective?
Our understanding of the land was that this land is the dish with one spoon territory. And it describes the fact that this land is the dish that feeds us all. So this idea of covenant comes from that understanding of what the land means to us and what our relationships mean to one another.
So after 17 years of this journey, what inspires you to keep going?
Well, when our people first established this treaty relationship with one another on the land, we put together another belt called the Silver Covenant Chain, and it describes the relationship between people. This line is a symbol for linking arms together. So we meant to have a relationship together and be able to be in the land together. The strength of my ancestors is what keeps me moving forward in this conversation.
I think as someone who's now just stepping into this journey, I feel a sense of responsibility, but also joy in continuing this conversation. I think it's that vision of interconnectedness and also interdependence with the land that inspires me as well, and kind of calls us back to actually our Christian understanding of peace as well.
And that's what treaty is, and so that's mutual inspiration.
For Sterling Mennonite Church, an important step in restoring relationships begins by recognizing historical and current wrongs committed against First Nations communities. Each Sunday morning, the congregation begins its service with the reading of a land issue acknowledgement.
This land on which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We acknowledge the historical and ongoing wrongs committed by settlers and are mindful of the deep injustices in which we are complicit and from which we benefit. We seek to restore relationships with the Indigenous peoples who now live on this land.
The land acknowledgement is an important reminder that history on this land didn't begin with us, and that we came to live on this land as a result of treaties and agreements that have been broken. So we do need this reminder, but we need to go beyond words and move to action. One thing that Jesus teaches us is to be concerned about the material needs of people. So at Sterling, we've made a decision to pay 1% of our operating budget annually to the people of Six Nations, and that payment is offered in relationship.
Both the Sterling and the Six Nations communities see this 1% as a token gift. Witnessing for peace implies recognizing and actively challenging the ways in which we have benefited from injustice and oppressive systems. Peace, then, is not only about transforming unjust practices and institutions, but also about being transformed in the process. We hope you were able to experience the transmission video series as part of a living legacy of the Anabaptist movement.